Hello, my name is Helen Tonkin and I work with New South Wales Health, and I've been working in the sphere of social work in crisis intervention and trauma for close to 35 years. I had the great privilege at a time of crisis to travel down to the Snowy Valley regions when they were burning in late 2019, 2020, and ended up spending the following year working with bushfire recovery in the Snowy Valleys with the Snowy Valleys Council. We arrived to the fires while they were still burning, and the thing that I don't think many people realized is that the fires really raged for 50 days. So they would come through an area would be threatened, they would come back again, and there were up to 7 times that areas were threatened. And what we know about disaster response is it's often an immediate 24-hour, 48 period response, and then people have to start digging in to recover. But this was a period of up to 3 months of people being constantly threatened by the crisis and the trauma. And so the impact was that people were really uncertain. Information was primary at the time, and giving people a safe place. I think the thing that we found and that we were involved with was actually family reconnection. So letting people know where were family and friends, small rural communities that had been parted by fleeing, staying and defending, turning up at recovery centres. And so we were doing a lot of family reconnection or trying to identify where people were and if they were safe. Communication was difficult and down, so we were often driving out to areas that were significantly impacted to try and identify if people had water, power and communication. And so we were assisting people to move to actually quite far-flung areas of rural New South Wales, which again was disenfranchising people from knowing where their loved ones were, what was happening to them. And so we were actually providing a hand of communication to keep in touch with people and really keep them connected, because their fear was ongoing. And so we were very involved in the connection. I think there are 3 nursing homes specifically in the medical multi-purpose centres that you have in a regional centre that were all evacuated. So we were helping a lot with evacuation. And then it was about actually maintaining communication with family who'd either stayed in area or who were evacuated locally, but their loved ones were evacuated to quite distant rural towns. And so that disconnection in a time of crisis and lack of communication, I think, was the most difficult factor. So we would find out how people were doing and we would encourage them to have connection with loved ones. Found with the longer term impact of people that had lived through disaster and an ongoing disaster. So their adrenaline is constantly re-triggered by the fear, flight and fight reaction. And we find that the extended nature of cortisol in the blood has very unhealthy effects. So an extended lack of knowing, lack of communication with insurance companies, government agencies, financial security, post-disaster was leading to what we found significant increased ill health, hospital presentations, and cardiac and respiratory issues. And unfortunately, a year to 2 years following the fires, we were seeing people with that largely had comorbid chronic illness, having their illness exacerbated and actually passing away. We had a number of deaths that were directly attributable to stress reaction post the fires, the business of just trying to recover from the fires. And so we were trying to do early intervention to offer people support, often through allowing them to discuss the difficulties of just getting back to fiscal security, a decent place to live. Often they were living in temporary accommodation. I think the primary thing was just to support people in knowing they were safe. There would be someone supporting them, and they had a means of somebody that had ongoing concern. Quite often there'll be a significant amount of people that will travel to the area. We were part of that initially, and then leave after a month, and imagine that they're all going to just get back to it. And in fact, what we found in the positions that Resilience New South Wales then funded ongoing for the next 3 years, which I was part of, was to maintain that contact and understand the ongoing nature of disaster recovery. And so I think that there's a significant body of research, particularly from the Victorian fires of 87 and in the 90s, that has given us excellent information of understanding the longevity, the nature of recovery not being a matter of months, but in fact being a matter of years. And very much like crisis intervention, it's the business of the first year, the increasing cortisol levels of the second year, the dip into depression and fatigue of the second to third year, and then the significant conflict that can arise, both in families and also in people feeling they just don't have the mettle to keep going. And we do see that's a point of suicidal ideation, but also suicides that we were offering early intervention to, really attempt to avoid, often through provision of information, which is really what people needed to know what the process was in order to be able to actually deal with that. I think it's important to say that following crisis or trauma, 80% of people have significant skills of resilience and bouncing back, strategies, ideas, and good connection. Really what we want to do is offer advice to those that are often in a more difficult position, where they have been previously under anxiety or in very difficult circumstances, or are caring for those that they love, and it's a taxing kind of environment. So what we want to say is 10% of that remaining 20%, with some support at the time, do very well. They respond well, and they're able to pull forward the strengths and supports within themselves. That other 10% are usually people with significant comorbidities, often mental health difficulties, or significant previous trauma and stress that still plagues them. There is every possibility for them to manage well through disaster and trauma, but usually they do need to link in with services to support them to do so. And not only about being aware, being informed, but also then putting their hand out. And those are the people that we were actually pursuing, rather than them necessarily coming to us. When we met them, they were very grateful for our support. But I think to let people know that there is capacity for everybody to travel well through and post-trauma and disaster. But for a certain proportion, it is about actually offering them the ongoing support for at least 2 to 3 years. We can assist people by the provision of information. I'm a great believer that information offers us power to take control in making choices. So I think the fantastic work done by Carers New South Wales, and the workbook provided, and the time taken to really offer people appropriate information to be aware, to be informed, and to make choices, and have conversations prior to the event, has been fantastic. And that's what we are encouraging people to do. We do it in all spheres: end of life decisions, enduring guardianship. It's about actually letting those around you, your loved ones, the people you care for, your friends, your neighbors, your family, your community, know your thoughts and plan. So certainly what we found in disaster is that people might have had a fire plan where they would either evacuate or defend, stay and defend. But at the time, they couldn't necessarily follow the exact plans they had, when in a time without fear and anxiety, they were able to think fairly clearly through a process. But what it did do in having that plan, even if it did change, was it was understood that there was a plan A, B, and C, and they were now moving to plan B or C, and that all parties understood what had been communicated, what and why they would be changing their minds, that it was fine to change your mind at the time, based on the circumstances that arose that couldn't have been predicted at the time of making the plan. So we were encouraging people to really take the time to sit down with that workbook and just actually think about the things like having a safe box with your important documentation that you could grab and go, not running around the house trying to find the title deeds of the house or the banking information, passports, etc., but having that kept safe for any opportunity and any time, but particularly during disaster, to know where people will be and how you will communicate. Having a list of people, so particularly for carers, if you were assisting people to leave, it was getting to a resource centre where you would stay, and you might be there for some weeks, but knowing your medication list, your treatment plan, and who the important people were that could be contacted around a medical plan or indeed a decision-making plan. So it's fantastic to be guided by a workbook that says, think about this, make a decision, although be fluid around that being able to change, have a list of all the people that you would like to know about A and B and C. So again, it was always about communication, about connection. And I think having had the plan, even the discussion, even if it did change, you felt you had a sense of control. What we know about crisis and trauma is that people feel helpless, hopeless, powerless, and really become very anxious and immobilized by not having a plan when they haven't actually any clarity around what they were going to do. Having had the conversation allowed them space to know they'd covered the bases and then be able to make decisions accordingly. So in times of trauma, we are going to be triggered into that fight or flight or freeze response. We want people to be able to reconnect with the frontal lobe of action planning and be able to put some of that into motion. So I can't stress enough, have the conversations, plan and go through that workbook, which many people would take the workbook, they would never actually fill it in. It was always, well, it's here, we've got the workbook. So when it happens, oh, well, we have it, it's in the drawer somewhere. But it's actually about the conversation the workbook elicits. And just bringing that forward and having the conversation, you are 10 steps ahead of those that haven't had the conversation, even if the plans change.